Tonight we wander through a city that smells like dust, olives, and ambition. Rome hums around you, horses clattering, sandals slapping, the thick perfume of roasted chestnuts and wet marble. You drift down a narrow street where torches tremble against cracked plaster walls, and the shadows seem alive, whispering gossip about emperors and bakers alike. You think you're safe, but, honestly, you probably won't survive this century without catching something unspeakable from the Tiber. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in the Subura, Rome's messy heart, where life is loud, cheap, and surprisingly fashionable. Tailors crowd the lower floors of crumbling insulae, their needles flashing like fireflies in lamplight. But one workshop feels different. The air hums with a strange reverence. Inside, a man in a stained tunic crouches over a pile of marble dust, rubbing it between his fingers like flour. He's a tailor, yes, but his clients don't bleed. His name, at least what the neighbors call him, is Lucius Crispus, the Roman tailor who sews for statues. You duck under a sagging lintel and step into his world. The floor is littered with cloth scraps, all dyed in imperial purple, linen fine enough to see through, and something odd that gleams like silk though no silkworm ever touched it. A jug of wine sits dangerously close to a half-carved bust, and a wax tablet holds a scribble of measurements not for humans, but for gods. Waist, Jupiter, 213 digits. You grin. Statues need fittings now? Crispus glances up, needle between his teeth. You here to pay or pray? He mutters, not even pretending to stop working. You tell him neither, you're just curious. He snorts. Then you'll fit right in. His current project stands before him, a marble Venus, hair uncoiled, expression eternally amused. Crispus drapes a shimmering fabric across her shoulder, tugging and pinning until it clings to the cold stone like a second skin. The flicker of the oil lamp makes it seem as though she's breathing. It's eerie, beautiful, and slightly scandalous, exactly what Rome likes. He steps back, frowning. She's too alive, he says. People will complain. Then he smirks. That means it's perfect. You watch him sew, though there's hardly sewing involved. His needle dances through folds of cloth, but occasionally he reaches for a chisel to carve a matching crease into the marble itself. This isn't tailoring, it's alchemy. The line between fabric and sculpture blurs until you can't tell what's real. You realize that in Rome, fashion isn't just vanity, it's theology. Statues must look divine, but gods are expected to look Roman. That's a lot of pressure for one tailor. It's said that during Augustus's reign, the emperor himself ordered his statue dressed anew each season to keep up with trends. Historians still argue whether this was early PR genius or just vanity in marble form. Crispus talks as he works, voice low and amused. They think I make togas, he says. I make belief. You tilt your head, not sure if he's joking. See, he continues, when they look at her, they see the goddess. But it's me who gives her the wrinkle where mortal fingers might have touched. Without that, she's just stone. He laughs softly, and you can tell he's had a few cups of wine. Besides, the gods pay better, fewer complaints about the hem. A clatter from outside interrupts him, a cart full of marble blocks from the quarries at Carora. The driver swears about the weight, and you can't help noticing the irony. Men sweating to move mountains so that artists can pretend they are soft. Crispus explains how he came to this peculiar profession. As a boy, he worked for a sculptor, learning how marble behaves like flesh if you treat it gently enough. But he grew bored of chisels and dust. He wanted motion, texture, and the chaos of cloth. So he became a tailor. Years later, when a temple priest commissioned him to sew ceremonial robes for a statue of Fortuna, he discovered his true calling. The goddess didn't complain, he says with a wink, but the priest fainted when he saw her dressed like an empress. You notice his hands, scarred from needles and blades alike, skin whitened by stone powder. There's a rhythm to his stitching, hypnotic enough to lull you into a half-trance. Outside, the night thickens. Somewhere, a lyre plays off-key, and a drunk shouts about lost sandals. Crispus pauses to dip his fingers into a small jar. Inside is something grey and gritty. Marble dust and oil, he says. Best polish there is. Also good for the skin, if you don't mind smelling like statues. He grins, and you wonder if he's entirely sane. A stray cat slips in through the door, winding between your ankles. Crispus tosses it a bit of thread, and it bats the string like a gladiator. That one's my inspector, he says. Keeps the mice from nibbling Jupiter's robes. As the lamp burns lower, Crispus tells you about his latest commission, a full wardrobe for the gods of the Forum. They want me to make Mars look merciful, he says. Not easy. Ever tried sewing a smile onto a war god? You shake your head, and he sighs theatrically. Me neither, but we'll see. He gestures toward a shelf of rolled fabrics. Each color means something. White for purity, purple for power, red for sacrifice. You reach toward a deep green bolt, and he nods approvingly. That one's for hope. Or envy. Depends who's paying. There's something almost modern about him, like a designer backstage at a chaotic fashion show. Only his models are carved and immortal, and his audience lights candles instead of taking selfies. He leans close to whisper, conspiratorial, you want to know the secret? It's all about gravity. Fabric falls, marble doesn't. So I cheat. He demonstrates, pulling a hidden wire through the drapery to mimic the tug of weight. The effect is uncanny. The statue looks caught mid-breath, mid-thought, mid-life. Outside, a bell tolls. Crispus stretches, yawning. Another day feeding the gods' vanity, he says, and then looks at you. But you look like you still believe they are watching. You shrug. Maybe you do. In this city, belief hangs in the air like incense. Dense, invisible, and slightly dangerous. He snuffs the lamp, and for a moment you see the marble Venus glowing faintly in the dark, her new robe trembling in the night air. For a flicker, you could swear she turns her head, ever so slightly, as though admiring his work. You blink, and she's still again. Crispus smiles into the shadows. She likes it, he murmurs. They always do. And you, standing there in the half-dark, realize this tailor doesn't just sew cloth. He stitches the line between mortal and divine, every fold a quiet act of faith or rebellion. Tomorrow, you'll follow him deeper into Rome's web of marble and silk, where even the gods need a good fitting. Morning in Rome doesn't so much begin as it barges in. Traders shouting, fountains splashing, someone arguing with a goose. You wake on a creaking cot in the corner of Crispus's workshop, blinking marble dust from your eyelashes. The air tastes faintly of lime and oil. Crispus is already at work, muttering to himself and tapping a chisel against a block of marble draped in rough cloth. You realize he's not carving the statue, he's teaching it how fabric falls. Stone doesn't listen, he grumbles, but sometimes it learns. You wander closer. The slab has been partially shaped into a figure, a toga-clad senator mid-speech, his mouth open in eternal persuasion. Crispus demonstrates how he measures every crease and fold, mapping them with chalk lines before sculptors cut. See, this edge here, he says. That's not just a fold, it's politics. The deeper the drape, the more gravitas. Historians still argue whether Roman sculptors exaggerated clothing folds to imply virtue or just to show off their skill. Either way, Crispus seems to think it's both. Every wrinkle says something, he explains. Even marble has to look like it's earned its wrinkles honestly. He grabs a length of linen from the table, drapes it over the statue, and stabs it lightly with a needle to hold the form. The trick, he says, is to sew where there's nothing to sew. He pulls the fabric tight, then marks where the stone should rise or sink. It's a strange marriage, needle and chisel, thread and hammer. You imagine Michelangelo watching from the future, quietly taking notes. Outside, Rome groans awake. A vendor calls out for fresh figs, a priest leads a small procession of flute players, a child cries because his wooden sword broke in half. The city never really stops moving, and somehow Crispus's calm defies it all. He tells you he once tried to teach sculptors how to drape their models properly. They told me I was just a tailor, he says, rolling his eyes. So I told them they were just quarry decorators. You laugh, earning a smirk from him. They didn't hire me for a while after that, he adds. Still, he got the last laugh. His technique, pinning real fabric onto clay molds before sculpting, spread quietly among the workshops. They copy my folds, he says. They think I don't notice. He shrugs. Let them. Gods need variety. He leads you to the back of the shop, where unfinished commissions wait beneath sheets. He lifts one, revealing a strange hybrid, half marble torso, half real tunic. The fabric glitters faintly with bronze threads. This, he whispers, is the future. Statues that breathe with time. Every festival, I'll change the cloth. The stone stays, the story shifts. You can't help thinking it sounds like Fashion Week meets Resurrection. Crispus rummages through a chest and pulls out a small collection of needles, some bronze, some bone, and one carved from obsidian, sharp enough to whisper through skin. You can tell a tailor's age by his needles, he says, and his luck by how few he's broken. He hands you one of the bone ones. It's smooth and slightly curved, a shape that feels ancient and intimate. They used to make them from buried bones, he explains. Swallows, mostly. For speed. You glance around and notice a small wax figure on a shelf, wrapped in red thread. That's not just practice, is it? You ask. He smirks. Every good craftsman has a charm, he says. That one keeps my stitches steady and my clients generous. The fringe between superstition and artistry here is razor thin. As the day warms, customers begin to arrive, not flesh and blood ones, but temple servants. They bring measurements, requests, and the occasional bribe. One priest insists that Jupiter's cloak must gleam like lightning trapped in cloth. Crispus just nods and pockets a coin. Lightning, eh? I'll need new dye. He turns to you. That means I'll be visiting the dyer's quarter tonight. Want to come? You agree, of course, because who says no to a man who tailors for gods? But before you leave, Crispus stops at his work table to sketch one last pattern. His chalk moves fast, tracing curves that almost seem alive. This is the difference, he says quietly. Sculptors freeze movement. I chase it. He runs his hand down the marble toga, dust coating his fingers like frost. When the wind blows through the forum, and it catches these folds just right, the statue looks like it's about to step down. That's the point. That breath between stillness and motion. He looks up at you, eyes bright in the dim workshop. If I can make stone look like it's about to move, maybe I can make men stop pretending they're not already statues. It's the kind of line that would sound pretentious from anyone else, but Crispus means it. You step outside into the sunlight. The heat bounces off the paving stones like a challenge. Across the street, a sculptor's apprentice chips at a block, sending marble flakes into the air. For a second, you think you see one flake drift toward you, shining like a thread. The two crafts, sculpture and tailoring, blur in your mind now. Both are about control, over form, over illusion, over what lasts. The Romans were obsessed with it. Even their togas were statements of hierarchy and purity. Fold them wrong, and you could be mistaken for a slave. A real historical fact, the toga virilis ceremony marked a boy's transition into manhood, as sacred as a wedding. And here's Crispus, dressing actual gods in those same symbols. He joins you, brushing marble dust off his tunic. The sculptors think they are eternal, he mutters. But cloth is honest. It ages. He pulls a thread from his sleeve and watches it dance in the wind before it disappears. Everything does. As you walk with him toward the Tiber, the city unfolds like one of his garments, pleats of noise, folds of light, seams of shadow. He tells you about a rumor spreading through the artisans, that the emperor is commissioning new statues of the gods, all to be dressed by one tailor. He pretends he's not interested, but the way his fingers twitch says otherwise. Before night falls, Crispus pauses on a bridge and looks at the river. You know, he says, the water shapes stone too. Just slower. He tosses a pebble in. Maybe that's what I do, speed it up a little. The setting sun paints the marble of the city gold, and for a moment, every statue looks alive, every shadow stitched in motion. You can almost hear the whisper of thread through time, sewing together craft, faith, and vanity into one seamless drape. And beside you, the tailor of statues hums an old tune, half lullaby, half prayer, while his city glows like a living sculpture waiting for its next fitting. By dawn, you're already back in the workshop, half awake and half covered in marble powder. The tailor's cat curls on a pile of linen, twitching in its sleep, while Crispus sharpens his tools with a focus that could slice through eternity. This morning isn't about silk or toga folds. It's about the tools themselves, the secret anatomy of his trade. You can't stitch gods with blunt bones, he says, holding up a needle thin enough to pierce a sunbeam. He lays them out in neat rows, bronze, bone, iron, and one that gleams black as obsidian. Each has a story. Bronze for strength, he murmurs. Bone for forgiveness. Obsidian for revenge. He pauses and looks at you sideways. Don't ask who I made that last one for. You wisely don't. He dips a small needle into olive oil, warming it over the lamp's flame. This makes it glide, he says. The smell mingles with smoke, wine, and faint incense. It's oddly soothing. You watch him test the edge by pressing it into his palm, not enough to break skin, just enough to draw a sigh. The Romans didn't use thread the way you imagine it. Linen, wool, sinew, even gold wire, all were fair game. If it holds, it sews. Crispus jokes, threading a fine strand of dyed linen through the eye of his needle. The color is the blue of the Aegean, the kind emperors wore on feast days. You know, he says, they ban this color sometimes. Too close to divine. He tells you how his tools evolved. Bone needles inherited from Greek ancestors, bronze ones traded from Egypt, and iron from local blacksmiths who swear by Mars himself. The instruments gleam like miniature weapons, which isn't far off. A needle's a sword for smaller battles, Crispus says. Quieter ones, but not less dangerous. You notice a row of curious objects hanging above his table, small dolls made of cloth, each with a stitch across the heart. Practice, he claims, then smirks. Or prayers. Depending on the day. There's always that whisper of superstition. One of them wears a toga hemmed in purple, the imperial dye that once came from crushed sea snails, literally thousands for a single robe. Historians still argue whether the dye's purpose was holiness or just wealth flexing. Either way, it stained more than fabric, it stained politics. Crispus takes out a sandal, half-finished leather, supple and fragrant. "I sew these too," he says. "A statue can't stand forever without a good soul." You blink, not sure whether he's joking, until he shows you the delicate stitching along the sandal's edge, so perfect it looks drawn rather than sewn. "The trick," he says, "is to pretend you're mending time." You step closer as he begins to demonstrate. With each pass of the needle, the leather puckers like living skin. "The gods may not walk," he says softly, "but we still give them the dignity of being ready." His tone is half reverent, half mischievous. He leans back, wiping sweat from his brow. "Do you know why Romans wrap everything in cloth?" he asks suddenly. "Statues, corpses, even promises." You shake your head. Because fabric remembers. It folds the way water flows, around truth, over lies, always hiding something beneath. As he talks, the morning light pours through the window, scattering across bits of polished marble. You swear you see faces in the reflections, fragments of gods, half-formed, watching. Crispus doesn't notice, or maybe he does and pretends not to. You help him organize spools of thread. There's one dyed with saffron, another with soot, and a third shimmering faintly with gold dust. "That one's for the emperor's statues," he says. "Gold on gold, because why not remind everyone who owns the sun?" He rolls his eyes, and you both laugh. He tells you a story about a sculptor from Athens who once carved marble drapery so fine you could see light through it. They say he cheated. Crispus muses, used wax and melted it off. He leans close, whispering, maybe he just understood fabric better than stone. Then he adds, with a grin, "Historians still argue whether that was genius or blasphemy. I say both." A knock at the door interrupts him. A young apprentice enters carrying a bundle wrapped in linen. Inside is a small bust, unfinished, its eyes blank, its mouth half open like it's mid-gossip. "For the forum," the apprentice says nervously. "Needs draping." Crispus waves him away. "Leave it. The gods and I will handle it." Once alone, he turns to you. "Watch closely," he says, setting the bust on the table. He drapes a scrap of cloth over the shoulders, then takes a fine bronze needle and starts sewing the fabric directly into the wax underlayer. "See? The wax holds the shape. Later, when the sculptor carves, the lines are already there." You lean in, it's hypnotic. The folds form shadows, illusions of movement, stories caught mid-gesture. He stops abruptly. "Ah. See that line? Too stiff." He pulls a stitch loose with his teeth. Even marble needs mercy. You glance at his tools again. Each one gleams differently in the light, some ancient, some almost futuristic. He explains how he tempers them in vinegar to sharpen the tips, how bone needles flex under heat. He even shows you a tiny awl carved with a serpent design. "For piercing leather and egos," he quips. Outside, thunder rumbles faintly. The afternoon storm approaches, and the workshop feels smaller, the air heavy with electricity. Crispus seems to sense it too. "Rain's coming," he says. "Good. Marble likes a bath." As lightning flashes through the window, illuminating the statues, you notice how their drapery gleams, real fabric on fake bodies, or perhaps the other way around. It's hard to tell. The sound of the storm feels like distant applause. Crispus lowers his tools, satisfied. "Every stitch," he says, "is a gamble. You think you're fixing something, but maybe you're binding it too tight. The gods don't always appreciate craftsmanship." He gestures at the bust, smiling faintly. They prefer flattery. A gust of wind knocks a jar from the shelf. It shatters, scattering pins across the floor like tiny constellations. Well, he sighs, at least the fates are tidy tonight. He crouches to pick them up, humming that same lazy tune as before. You help, though your eyes keep drifting to the marble figures watching from the shadows. When the storm finally breaks, rain washes through the open window, speckling the floor with drops that glimmer against the dust. The air smells of metal and wet stone. Crispus stands, hands on his hips, admiring his half-finished work. You feel that? He asks. That's Rome exhaling, reminding us we're temporary. You nod, feeling the weight of centuries in that tiny room. The tailor, his needles, his fabrics, they are all fleeting. Yet the folds he creates will outlive them all. Maybe that's what drives him, not immortality, but the illusion of it. He sits down heavily, pours wine into 2 chipped cups, and slides one toward you. To stitches, he toasts. May they hold longer than promises. You drink, and for a moment, you taste eternity, metal, marble, rain, and the faint sweetness of forgotten dye. The next day begins with incense. Thick coils of it drift through the tailor's cramped workshop, winding between spools and statues until the air feels alive. Crispus stands before you, unusually solemn. We've been summoned, he says. Temple of Jupiter. They want the old man dressed for a festival. He sounds half annoyed, half honored, like a musician called to tune the gods' lyres. You follow him through Rome's morning bustle, the streets still slick from last night's rain, puddles catching the sky like broken mirrors. Around you, vendors argue, children chase dogs, and somewhere, a philosopher shouts about virtue while stealing grapes. Crispus pushes through it all with his tailor's bag clutched close, needles clinking softly inside. The temple rises ahead, enormous and golden, perched on the Capitoline hill. You feel small just looking at it, like a thread about to snap. At the entrance, priests wait in their snow-white robes, their expressions carved from politeness and suspicion. You're late, one mutters. The god is impatient. Crispus smirks. Then he can blame the laundry. Inside, the air hums with ritual. The statue of Jupiter towers above everything, larger than life and twice as judgmental, carved from ivory and wood, draped in a robe that's clearly seen better decades. Crispus tilts his head. Who dressed him last? A mason with mittens. A priest coughs, scandalized. Show respect. Crispus bows, but his grin doesn't fade. Respect is in the stitching, not the speech. He unrolls the new garment, deep purple trimmed in gold, the kind of cloth that costs more than a small farm. He fingers the edge reverently, then nods to you. Hold this. Don't drop it, or the god'll strike you bald. You're not sure if he's joking. Probably not. He circles the statue like a general inspecting a soldier, adjusting folds, muttering measurements. Shoulders too square, he says. Waist stiff. And don't get me started on the sandals, absolute tragedy. The priests exchange worried looks. The fitting begins. He clambers up a small ladder, tossing the heavy fabric across Jupiter's massive shoulders. It's always the shoulders, he grumbles. Too heroic for good tailoring. He smooths the cloth, pinning it invisibly with fine bronze hooks. To your surprise, the folds fall perfectly, cascading down like thunder-made silk. As he works, Crispus starts telling you stories, half history, half gossip. Did you know they used to parade this statue through the streets? He says. Tied it to an ox cart, like the god needed fresh air. Historians still argue whether it was worship or just excellent marketing. He chuckles, stepping back to squint at his work. He gestures for a priest to hand him the golden sash. Careful, he warns. That's not thread, it's actual wire. Cut your finger, and Jupiter'll get blood on his best. The priests whisper nervously about omens and sacred protocols. Crispus ignores them, humming softly as he threads the sash through the folds. The robe gleams with each movement, catching stray beams of sunlight that spill through the oculus above. For a moment, you forget you're looking at a statue. The god seems to breathe. Too lifelike, one priest mutters under his breath. The people might think he's watching. Crispus smiles. He should be. You stand back, mesmerized. The robe looks lighter than air, though you felt its weight earlier. Every fold suggests motion, wind, divinity, judgment. It's as if the god himself might shift any second, irritated at your gawking. Then, as Crispus secures the final knot, something curious happens. A faint crack echoes from the statue's shoulder joint. One priest gasps. Another crosses himself with the wrong hand. A sign, someone whispers. The god disapproves. Crispus freezes, one hand still on the fabric. No, he says calmly. It's the wood swelling from last night's rain. He glances at you. Tell them, will you? Gods don't creak. Still, the rumor begins before you've even left the temple. By the time you reach the steps, acolytes are already murmuring about omens, how Jupiter twitched during the dressing, how his eyes flashed with anger. Crispus groans. They'll be saying I resurrected him by supper. You descend into the marketplace again, carrying his bag while he complains loudly about divine drama. You try sewing for someone who's been sitting in the same pose for 3 centuries. No give, no gratitude. He sighs. At least the cats purr. At a fountain, he stops to wash his hands, marble dust swirling away. Still, he admits, it's something, isn't it? To touch what others only pray to. His tone softens. Makes you careful. He tells you that once, during Nero's reign, tailors like him were forbidden to alter temple garments without priestly approval. They said we meddled with the divine image, he recalls. One man was flogged for shortening Venus's hem. Imagine that, exiled for a good sense of proportion. He grins, but his eyes flicker with caution. We walk on sacred thread, my friend. You wander through the forum, the sound of traders and preachers rising like competing choirs. Every corner holds a statue, Augustus, Mars, Mercury, all dressed or carved as if they've just stepped out of a Roman runway. Crispus points at one particularly pompous figure. See that, he says. That's my work. You look closer. The folds do look familiar, gentle, precise, almost breathing. They said a gust of wind could lift that toga, he boasts. Even if it's stone. As you continue, you pass an old woman selling amulets. She holds one out to Crispus, a small silver needle tied with red thread. For luck, she croaks. So your hands never shake. Crispus hesitates, then buys it, tucking it into his belt. Can't hurt, he mutters. The gods have opinions, and I'd rather not stab one by accident. By sunset, the festival begins. From the hilltop, you can see torches flickering like fireflies around Jupiter's temple. Music echoes through the streets, drums and pipes merging with laughter. The priests unveil the newly dressed statue, and the crowd gasps. Even from a distance, the robe shimmers as though alive. Crispus watches quietly beside you. They'll think it's a miracle, he says. Maybe it is. Then, softer, or maybe I'm just good with a needle. The crowd chants prayers, the kind that roll like thunder. Somewhere in the noise, you hear the faintest rustle, like fabric brushing marble. You glance at Crispus. He's smiling, but not at you. His eyes are fixed on the temple, on the statue now glowing in torchlight. He approves, he says. A joke, probably. But you both know you'll remember that sound, the whisper of thread in divine silence, for the rest of your life. That night, the tailor's workshop feels heavier. Maybe it's the incense still clinging to your clothes, or maybe it's the faint hum of rumor floating down from the temple hill. Either way, the air seems stitched tight with whispers. You sit near the lamp while Crispus cleans his needles, the metallic scrape of bronze against stone rhythmic, almost prayerful. They'll be talking about it all week, he says finally. Jupiter blinking, shoulders creaking, cloth shimmering like lightning. He snorts. If gods have PR agents, I should be one. But beneath the humor, something shadows his voice. As the wind rattles the shutters, you notice the apprentices huddled near the doorway, speaking in low voices. They fall silent when Crispus looks their way. Out with it, he says. What's the tragedy tonight? The youngest, a boy with ink-stained fingers, clears his throat. Sir, the temple steward said, he said the needle you used today was cursed. Crispus bursts into laughter so loud it startles the cat. A cursed needle? What's next? Haunted thread? The boy doesn't laugh. They say it belonged to a tailor who angered a god, Apollo, maybe, and that anyone who pricks divine fabric with it, he trails off. Ends up sewing his own shroud. Another apprentice finishes, almost whispering. Crispus rolls his eyes. If I believed every curse, I'd never get a hem straight. But when he goes back to polishing the needle, you notice his hand trembles, just slightly. The superstition spreads faster than spilled dye. By morning, even the marble masons across the street are murmuring about the tailor who made Jupiter twitch. People avoid walking too close to the workshop. A few toss small offerings, a coin here, a fig there, as if trying to appease whatever spirit they think you've stirred. You try to laugh it off, but at night the whispers seem to crawl up the walls. Crispus pretends not to notice. He throws himself into new work, sewing miniature robes for household statues, mending priest sashes, even patching gladiators' tunics. Anything to keep his hands moving. Yet every so often, his gaze flicks toward the cursed needle resting in its bronze cup. One evening, as rain hisses on the roof, he finally speaks of it. It wasn't always mine, he says. Came from a Greek tailor in Ostia. Man claimed he could stitch the breath of the sea into fabric. He chuckles. He drowned, of course. But I liked the story. He lifts the needle, turning it in the lamplight. Bronze like any other, but see here. He points to a tiny engraving, a sunburst near the eye. He said Apollo's symbol. Me, I think it's just an artist's vanity mark. But who knows? Gods love signatures. He sets it down gently, as though it might break. If it's cursed, it's a useful curse, he says. Everything I sew with it looks alive. The apprentices aren't convinced. One refuses to work after dark. Another starts leaving offerings of lavender and salt at the window. Crispus teases them, calling it perfume for cowards. But you notice he never throws the offerings away. A few nights later, a customer arrives, a widow in a mourning veil, her face pale as marble. She carries a bundle wrapped in black cloth. I was told you could make the gods listen, she says softly. Crispus straightens. Depends what language they are speaking. She unwraps the bundle, a small household statue of her husband, newly deceased, carved by some street artisan. The face is earnest but crude, the body stiff. They say if his likeness is dressed properly, his spirit will rest easier. Crispus studies it for a long moment. I can make him look more at peace, he says finally. He gestures for you to fetch a scrap of linen, light gray, soft as mist. He works in silence, wrapping the statue's shoulders, folding and refolding until the lines fall like gentle sighs. When he ties the final knot, the expression seems to soften, as though grief itself had exhaled. The widow bursts into tears. He looks just like the day we wed. She presses a coin into his palm. Thank you, Tailor. After she leaves, the apprentices stare, uneasy. It moved, one whispers. I swear it did. Crispus only shrugs. Everything moves if you watch long enough. Later that night, when the shop is quiet, you catch him speaking softly to the cursed needle. Just a whisper, barely audible. If you're listening, make it worth the trouble. Outside, thunder rolls again. The city glistens with wet stone, reflecting torchlight like veins of gold. From somewhere nearby comes the sound of singing, rough, mournful, the kind sailors used to keep time. You can't sleep. The air feels charged. When you open your eyes, you think you see something impossible. One of the smaller statues on the shelf, perhaps the Venus from earlier, seems to tilt ever so slightly, her robe rippling though there's no wind. You blink, and she's still. But you're not sure anymore what's marble and what's story. By morning, the cursed needle is gone. Crispus searches every corner of the workshop, muttering curses of his own. It's not the coin I mind, he grumbles, overturning baskets of fabric. It's the principle. Bronze doesn't just grow legs. You can tell by the tightness in his jaw that he's worried, though he won't say it aloud. Outside, Rome is already waking, smoke from bakeries curling over rooftops, temple bells echoing across the hills. The city feels restless, like a garment that doesn't fit quite right. A messenger arrives mid-morning, dressed in crimson livery. He bows awkwardly, avoiding the statue's gaze. Lucius Crispus, he says, you're summoned to the Basilica Aemilia. The senator's wife demands your service. Crispus raises an eyebrow. Demands? Not requests. The messenger shrugs. She's a senator's wife. Crispus sighs, grabs his satchel, and motions for you to follow. Let's see which marble family wants divine tailoring today. The Basilica Aemilia gleams like a palace, columns tall as pride, floors polished enough to see your own hesitation in them. Inside, voices echo off stone. Senators in togas whisper in clusters, their rings flashing like coins in sunlight. Politics here smells of perfume and old ambition. Lady Aemilia herself sits near the dais, draped in emerald silk, a walking treasury of pearls and poise. Her face softens when she sees Crispus, but only slightly. You're the tailor who dressed Jupiter, she says. They say the god moved. Crispus bows just enough to be polite. If he did, my lady, he didn't leave a tip. She smiles thinly. Good. You'll dress my husband's statue next. He insists on looking divine. She gestures toward a marble likeness of a stone-faced man in military armor. The sculptor did well, but the drapery, dreadful. Make him appear celestial. Crispus walks a slow circle around the statue, tugging thoughtfully at his chin. Celestial? He's holding a scroll, not a thunderbolt. Then give him both, Lady Aemilia says, dismissing the problem with a flick of her jeweled fingers. The people must see him as Jupiter's equal. You exchange a glance with Crispus. Dangerous request. Comparing oneself to a god rarely ends in comfort. Still, a senator's wife doesn't ask twice. He nods. Very well. I'll need gold thread, a bit of patience, and, he sniffs, fewer perfumes in this room. They dull the senses. While servants fetch materials, Crispus leans toward you. You see, he whispers. Politics in every pleat. As he begins his work, He explains that senators often commission garments for their statues to signal power, not piety. Dress your marble like a god, he says, and people start treating you like one. He pins a deep crimson cloak over the statue's shoulder, folding the fabric to fall in dramatic lines. Each crease, he mutters, a speech. Each shimmer, a bribe. He stitches quickly, his fingers steady now that he's in his element. The Senate pretends it's marble, solid, eternal. But underneath, he gestures toward the cloth. Thread and ambition. All it takes is one loose stitch. As he works, servants watch in silent awe. The fabric seems to obey him, rippling in perfect obedience. You could swear the statue's marble eyes gleam with pride, or hunger. One servant gasps when the hem lifts slightly in the still air. It moved. Crispus rolls his eyes. Everything moves. Air moves. Imagination moves faster. But even he looks uneasy when the gold thread catches the sunlight just so, glowing like fire. By the time he finishes, the senator's statue looks transformed, half man, half divinity. The folds shimmer with impossible realism. Lady Emilia clasps her hands together, delighted. Magnificent, she breathes. You've given him power even Jupiter might envy. Crispus bows slightly. Then may Jupiter forgive me. As you leave, a young senator intercepts him. The emperor's steward will hear of this, he says with a grin. He's commissioning artists for a grand project, a monument to imperial glory. You might soon be sewing for Caesar himself. Crispus laughs, but there's a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. Gods and senators already exhaust me. I'm not sure my needle's ready for an emperor. On the way back through the forum, the talk turns to gossip. Senators bribing sculptors to make their busts handsomer, temples competing for the most fashionable idols. You see, Crispus says, Rome is a runway for eternity. Everyone wants their statue to outshine their neighbors. He stops at a food stall, buys 2 honey cakes, and hands you one. Eat. Tailoring revolutions takes energy. He grins. Also sugar. You sit near the steps of a temple dedicated to Concordia, watching the city pulse around you. Crispus seems almost cheerful again, though his eyes dart toward every glint of metal, as if still searching for the missing needle. By morning, the cursed needle is gone. Crispus searches every corner of the workshop, muttering curses of his own. It's not the coin I mind, he grumbles, overturning baskets of fabric. It's the principle. Bronze doesn't just grow legs. You can tell by the tightness in his jaw that he's worried, though he won't say it aloud. Outside, Rome is already waking, smoke from bakeries curling over rooftops, temple bells echoing across the hills. The city feels restless, like a garment that doesn't fit quite right. A messenger arrives mid-morning, dressed in crimson livery. He bows awkwardly, avoiding the statue's gaze. Lucius Crispus, he says, you're summoned to the Basilica Aemilia. The senator's wife demands your service. Crispus raises an eyebrow. Demands? Not requests. The messenger shrugs. She's a senator's wife. Crispus sighs, grabs his satchel, and motions for you to follow. Let's see which marble family wants divine tailoring today. The Basilica Aemilia gleams like a palace, columns tall as pride, floors polished enough to see your own hesitation in them. Inside, voices echo off stone. Senators in togas whisper in clusters, their rings flashing like coins in sunlight. Politics here smells of perfume and old ambition. Lady Emilia herself sits near the dais, draped in emerald silk, a walking treasury of pearls and poise. Her face softens when she sees Crispus, but only slightly. You're the tailor who dressed Jupiter, she says. They say the god moved. Crispus bows just enough to be polite. If he did, my lady, he didn't leave a tip. She smiles thinly. Good. You'll dress my husband's statue next. He insists on looking divine. She gestures toward a marble likeness of a stone-faced man in military armor. The sculptor did well, but the drapery, dreadful. Make him appear celestial. Crispus walks a slow circle around the statue, tugging thoughtfully at his chin. Celestial? He's holding a scroll, not a thunderbolt. Then give him both, Lady Emilia says, dismissing the problem with a flick of her jeweled fingers. The people must see him as Jupiter's equal. You exchange a glance with Crispus. Dangerous request. Comparing oneself to a god rarely ends in comfort. Still, a senator's wife doesn't ask twice. He nods. Very well. I'll need gold thread, a bit of patience, and, he sniffs, fewer perfumes in this room. They dull the senses. While servants fetch materials, Crispus leans toward you. You see, he whispers. Politics in every pleat. As he begins his work, he explains that senators often commission garments for their statues to signal power, not piety. Dress your marble like a god, he says, and people start treating you like one. He pins a deep crimson cloak over the statue's shoulder, folding the fabric to fall in dramatic lines. Each crease, he mutters, a speech. Each shimmer, a bribe. He stitches quickly, his fingers steady now that he's in his element. The Senate pretends it's marble, solid, eternal. But underneath, he gestures toward the cloth. Thread and ambition. All it takes is one loose stitch. As he works, servants watch in silent awe. The fabric seems to obey him, rippling in perfect obedience. You could swear the statue's marble eyes gleam with pride, or hunger. One servant gasps when the hem lifts slightly in the still air. It moved. Crispus rolls his eyes. Everything moves. Air moves. Imagination moves faster. But even he looks uneasy when the gold thread catches the sunlight just so, glowing like fire. By the time he finishes, the senator's statue looks transformed, half man, half divinity. The folds shimmer with impossible realism. Lady Emilia clasps her hands together, delighted. Magnificent, she breathes. You've given him power even Jupiter might envy. Crispus bows slightly. Then may Jupiter forgive me. As you leave, a young senator intercepts him. The emperor's steward will hear of this, he says with a grin. He's commissioning artists for a grand project, a monument to imperial glory. You might soon be sewing for Caesar himself. Crispus laughs, but there's a flicker of apprehension in his eyes. Gods and senators already exhaust me. I'm not sure my needle's ready for an emperor. On the way back through the forum, the talk turns to gossip. Senators bribing sculptors to make their busts handsomer, temples competing for the most fashionable idols. You see, Crispus says, Rome is a runway for eternity. Everyone wants their statue to outshine their neighbors. He stops at a food stall, buys 2 honey cakes, and hands you one. Eat. Tailoring revolutions takes energy. He grins. Also sugar. You sit near the steps of a temple dedicated to Concordia, watching the city pulse around you. Crispus seems almost cheerful again, though his eyes dart toward every glint of metal, as if still searching for the missing needle. He tells you about the dyes senators favor: Tyrian purple for authority, saffron for piety, deep blue for divine aspiration. Each color whispers something, he says. Wear too much purple, and people think you're greedy. Too little, and they think you're poor. The perfect toga is like politics, balanced deceit. A sudden shout breaks through the noise. A slave runs by, shouting about a theft from the temple of Jupiter. Someone stole a sacred item, he cries. Bronze, small, with a mark of the sun. You and Crispus freeze. He forces a laugh, but it sounds brittle. Coincidence, he says. Probably a candlestick. But the whisper follows you all the way home. That evening, the workshop feels colder. Crispus lights every lamp, muttering about thieves and fools. If it's gone, he says, then maybe that's best. Let Apollo curse someone else for a while. You think you see relief flicker across his face, but it's gone too quickly to be sure. Still, when he finally sits down to sketch tomorrow's commission, he pauses. Politics, gods, curses, it's all thread, really, he murmurs. Pull the wrong one, and the whole empire unravels. He doesn't notice the small object glinting in the corner, half buried in marble dust, faintly glowing under lamplight. The missing needle, back where it shouldn't be. And as you drift to sleep, the tailor hums a tune you don't recognize, something soft, uncertain, and very old. By dawn, the tailor is already working, except he's not stitching cloth anymore. He's measuring statues. The workshop smells of dust and oil, marble chips glinting like frost on the floor. You watch as Crispus murmurs to himself, pacing from one figure to another. A Venus, an Apollo, a long-forgotten general whose stone eyes seem bored by immortality. The cursed needle rests nearby in its bronze cup. He doesn't touch it, but he keeps glancing at it, as though it's both a promise and a threat. You see this one, he says, gesturing toward the Venus. She's perfect from the knees down. But the folds, look how the sculptor guessed at silk, didn't know how it breathes. He runs his hand over the marble drapery, his fingers tracing invisible fabric. We can fix that. You realize, with a strange thrill, that he's planning something audacious, clothing the statues themselves, not as offerings, not for commission, but for art. Word spreads quickly. By afternoon, a small crowd gathers outside, peeking in through the doorway to watch the madness unfold. A tailor dressing statues? Rome has seen stranger things, emperors who think they are gods, poets who talk to ghosts, but still, people whisper. He starts with a small one, a statue of a dancer, perhaps once part of a fountain. He drapes it in fine linen dyed the color of dusk, then threads the needle, yes, the cursed one, with silver thread. The air stills. Each stitch seems to sink deeper than fabric, anchoring light itself. When he ties the final knot, something uncanny happens. The fabric hangs just so, clinging and floating, exactly like a real breeze had touched it. The dancer's marble toes peek through folds that almost shimmer. Someone in the doorway gasps. It looks alive. Crispus smiles faintly. That's the point. Soon, more statues arrive, brought by priests, merchants, even an actress who swears her idol will bring luck on stage. The workshop becomes a parade of stone faces and rustling cloth. You help steady them as Crispus measures, cuts, stitches. He mutters constantly while working. Folds must fall like time, shoulders must remember weight. You're not sure if he's describing fashion or philosophy. By the third day, he's exhausted but radiant. They are mannequins, he says proudly. But divine ones. Look at them, Rome's first runway of eternity. He isn't wrong. When evening comes, he arranges the statues in the courtyard. The torchlight glances off linen, bronze, and marble, making everything shimmer. Passers-by stop to stare. A child whispers, "Are they going to move?" "Only if you blink," Crispus says with a wink. The next morning, the news explodes across the city. The tailor who sews 4 stone, the forum criers shout. Some mock him, others call it genius. A sculptor from Athens visits, frowning in confusion. "He's undoing our work," The man grumbles. Marble is supposed to imitate fabric. He's putting fabric back on marble. Crispus just laughs. Maybe I'm restoring modesty. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the birth of vivified sculpture, the blending of textile and statue that later artists tried to replicate. Some called it vanity, others whispered it was divinity creeping through thread. For Crispus, it's simply obsession. He begins experimenting with color, dyeing fabrics to mimic the faded pigments ancient statues once wore. He insists that Roman marble was never meant to be white. Our ancestors painted their gods gaudy, he says, mixing ochre and vermilion in a cracked bowl. We just forgot their brightness. He's right, of course. Archaeologists centuries later will confirm that statues were once vividly painted. But for now, it's considered eccentric, heretical, even. You notice, though, something uncanny. The statues don't gather dust anymore. Their garments remain fresh, unstained, as if cared for by invisible attendants. And sometimes, when you enter the workshop late at night, you think you see a shift in their poses. A tilt of the head. A flutter of cloth. One evening, a magistrate stops by, intrigued. "You've made the gods walk among us," he says approvingly. "You've turned cold marble into citizens." Crispus bows slightly. "Careful what you wish for, magistrate. Citizens demand bread and circuses." The magistrate laughs, thinking it a jest. But after he leaves, Crispus whispers, he doesn't realize statues already outlast men. You start to feel the presence of the statues even when you're not in the room. They seem to hum softly, a collective vibration just below hearing, like the city itself is breathing through them. That night, as rain taps on the shutters, you catch Crispus speaking to the Venus again. "Do they see you now?" he murmurs. "Do they finally understand you were never stone to begin with?" He drapes her shoulders with a gauze veil, gold-threaded, glowing in lamplight. "If the gods ever return," he adds softly, "they'll need something to wear." It's beautiful and eerie all at once. The next day, the crowd doubles. People bring offerings, as if his statues have become holy. A priest even blesses the workshop, muttering prayers just in case the gods are paying attention. Someone claims a statue winked. Another swears one whispered their name. Crispus just chuckles. "If they wink, tell them to pay me." But deep down, you can see the exhaustion wearing at him. His fingers are blistered, his eyes are red. He eats little, sleeps less. "I can't stop," he says one night. "Every statue I finish feels like a beginning." When you finally convince him to rest, he mutters as he drifts to sleep. The fabric remembers them. The folds, they know the bodies. In his dreams, he probably sees marble breathing. The next morning, a group of young sculptors stand outside, sketching the statues feverishly. One calls them marble mannequins, another stitched divinities. They argue whether it's art or sacrilege. "Historians will debate this forever," one says. And indeed, they will. That evening, as twilight pours like ink over Rome, Crispus stands among his creations, candle in hand. He looks at them the way an emperor might regard his legions. "They'll outlast me," he says quietly. "But maybe that's the point." He blows out the flame, and in the sudden darkness, you think you hear fabric rustle, not from wind, but from the marble figures shifting ever so slightly toward him. When the moonlight seeps through the window, their eyes gleam faintly, as though they're watching their Tailor dream. The next few days blur into candle smoke and whispered legends. People start calling Crispus the Tailor of Souls. Priests pass his workshop murmuring blessings, while skeptics cross the street, pretending not to stare. Even the city cats seem to slink more carefully past his doorway, tails twitching like question marks. Crispus, for his part, hardly notices. His hands move automatically, sewing, wrapping, adjusting. But his eyes keep flicking toward the floor, toward the faint seam of stone that separates the workshop from something deeper. You ever wonder, he says one night, what's beneath us? You know what he means. Rome sits atop Rome, layers of buried streets and forgotten altars. Sometimes, when the wind moans through the cracks, it sounds like voices. That evening, when the city settles into silence, he lifts a loose floor tile. Beneath it, darkness, cool and damp, breathing faintly like a sleeping beast. The catacombs, he whispers. Old temples, old bones. The gods Rome outgrew. You hesitate, but he's already lighting a lamp. Come on, he says with a grin. Let's see what inspiration hides below rent prices. The stairway spirals downward, air thick with age. You smell dust, incense, and something metallic, iron, maybe, or memory. Your lamp casts trembling light on walls carved with strange marks, half Christian symbols, half pagan spirals. Rome, in its endless transition phase. At the bottom lies a chamber, a small shrine half collapsed under centuries of neglect. Broken statues line the walls, fragments of faces, chipped limbs, a pile of hands that look almost pleading. In the center stands one full figure, a goddess of no name, her marble eyes blind with dust. Crispus exhales softly. They used to clothe her in funerary robes, he says, brushing her shoulder. To honor the dead. Fabric for farewell. You can almost hear the whispers now, soft, mournful, weaving through the cracks like stray threads of sound. He unrolls a bundle of linen he brought, dark blue, fine, nearly translucent. If the living can wear beauty, he murmurs, why not the forgotten? You help him lift the fabric. The gesture feels both sacred and foolish, but he works gently, wrapping the goddess in folds that fall like waves. As he ties the final knot, the air shifts, cooler, quieter, reverent. Historians still argue whether Roman burial garments were for the dead or for the gods, he says softly. Maybe both. Maybe the line was never clear. He steps back, studying his work. The goddess looks different now, not alive, exactly, but seen. That's the thing about death, Crispus mutters. It's not absence, it's unfinished tailoring. You smile faintly, unsure if that's comforting or unsettling. Then something unexpected happens. The lamp flickers, and for an instant, the folds of the goddess's robe seem to shimmer. The fabric moves ever so slightly, not with wind, but as if exhaling. Crispus freezes. Did you see? Yes, you whisper. He swallows. Maybe, air from below. Nothing more. But neither of you believes it. The whispers grow stronger, not menacing but curious, like a room full of ghosts leaning closer to listen. Crispus kneels. If you want me to make you beautiful again, he murmurs, I'll need more light. He returns the next day with candles, silk, and a small amphora of gold dye. You descend again, and soon the shrine glows with flickering light. He hums as he works, a slow, haunting tune you don't recognize. This one's for the underworld, he says, not quite joking. Let them have something elegant to wear. As he stitches, he tells stories of Roman burial rites, how mourners touched the deceased's lips with coins for Charon, how they burned garments to release the soul, how some families buried miniature togas for ghosts. Textiles for transitions, he says. Every culture knows the thread between worlds. He's right again. Archaeologists will one day find exactly that, cloth folded into graves, symbolic garments for journeys beyond. But tonight, you only feel the presence growing thicker, like a silent audience. The tailor finishes his work. The goddess stands cloaked in night blue silk, her empty eyes somehow softer. Do you think she approves? You whisper. Crispus tilts his head. If she didn't, we'd know. The ground trembles faintly, just a shift of old stone, you tell yourself. But when you climb back to the workshop, you swear you hear footsteps following, slow and deliberate. Later that week, a widow visits the shop, her eyes red from tears. They said you sew for statues, she says. Can you sew for someone who isn't here anymore? Crispus listens carefully. What did you have in mind? She produces a strip of her husband's tunic. Something small. A token for the grave. He nods, takes the cloth, and begins to work. You notice he uses the cursed needle again, almost reverently. When he's done, the simple piece of fabric has become something luminous, like moonlight folded into thread. The widow bursts into tears again, but these are softer, grateful. After she leaves, Crispus whispers, maybe that's what they wanted, the ones below. To be remembered through stitches. That night, you both descend once more into the catacombs. He lays the token before the goddess. For a heartbeat, the entire chamber seems to breathe. A faint shimmer glides across the fabric, and you smell lavender, faint, fleeting, utterly impossible. Crispus smiles faintly. See? Even death appreciates good tailoring. When you return to the surface, the city feels different. The air is lighter, the stars sharper. Somewhere deep below, you imagine a goddess wrapped in silk, glowing in eternal twilight. As you lock the workshop door, Crispus murmurs, Rome forgets, but the underworld keeps receipts. He chuckles at his own joke, but the sound trembles. You lie awake that night, hearing faint rustles from below, the sigh of silk, the murmur of marble voices thanking the man who remembered them. Maybe Rome sleeps above its own wardrobe of ghosts. A week passes, and the city begins to hum with a different kind of rumor. It starts in the baths, where senators gossip half submerged in steam, and spreads to the markets, where fishmongers repeat it between scales and salt. By the time it reaches the tailor's street, it's impossible to ignore. The emperor himself has heard of the man who sews for statues. You're barely halfway through sweeping the marble dust when the door slams open. A procession fills the workshop, imperial guards gleaming like polished thunder, a herald in crimson, and behind them, a steward carrying a scroll stamped with the golden seal of Rome. Crispus freezes, needle midair. If that's another tax notice, he mutters, I'm joining a monastery. The herald unrolls the parchment. By order of Caesar, Tailor Crispus of the Subura district is commanded to attend the Palatine at once. His craftsmanship has caught the eye of the divine ruler. Divine ruler, Crispus echoes under his breath. They really do love that adjective. The steward bows stiffly. You have been chosen to create ceremonial garments for a new imperial statue, the largest ever made. It will stand in the forum, visible from the Senate to the sea. You can almost hear his heartbeat. A commission from the emperor could make him immortal, or erase him entirely if he displeased the wrong marble face. Crispus forces a smile. Tell your master I'll bring my sharpest needles and my least honest compliments. The steward doesn't laugh. Tomorrow at dawn. That night, the workshop is restless. Crispus paces, muttering about proportions and divine expectations. How do you dress a man who thinks he's Jupiter's cousin? He grumbles. If I make him too human, he'll hate it. Too godlike, and the priests will faint. He lays out every fabric he owns, deep purple from Tyre, shimmering gold from Alexandria, and linen fine enough to slip through a ring. The cursed needle sits among them, gleaming softly in the lamplight like it knows what's coming. Historians still argue whether emperors truly believed their own divinity. he says absently, measuring a length of silk. But I think they just feared being forgotten. Immortality's a form of vanity. He stops, looks at you. And vanity, my friend, keeps tailors employed. Dawn comes cold and clear. You follow him through winding streets toward the Palatine Hill, where the palace rises like a mountain of marble dreams. The guards at the gate barely glance at you, just enough to make you wish they'd looked less. Inside, everything gleams. Mosaics glitter underfoot, fountains murmur in perfect rhythm, and the air smells of cedar and gold. You feel smaller with every step. They lead you to a vast hall where the unfinished statue waits. Even half-carved, it's monstrous, 20 feet tall, the emperor's likeness already eerily lifelike. His expression radiates calculated benevolence, the kind that makes you want to kneel even as you roll your eyes. Crispus stares up at it, awed despite himself. Well, he whispers, at least they got his chin right. The imperial steward watches, expression unreadable. You will design garments worthy of the divine presence. The emperor will inspect your progress in 3 days. 3 days. Crispus repeats. I need 3 months just to stop sweating. No reply. When the officials leave, he exhales shakily. All right, let's dress a god. You spend the morning scaling ladders, holding fabric against the colossal frame while Crispus calls up instructions. More drape on the left. No, the other left. We can't have Jupiter's cousin looking like a toga salesman. He works with feverish focus, draping purple silk across the statue's shoulders, pinning folds so they fall with impossible realism. He uses gold thread to outline lightning bolts along the hem, a subtle nod to Jupiter, though you suspect it's also a wink. As the sun shifts, the statue begins to look alive, shadows deepening in the creases of the fabric. Even the guards stop pretending not to stare. You know, Crispus says, stepping back, the emperor may not notice the stitches, but the gods might. At sunset, as you pack up, he glances once more at the statue. If I get this wrong, he murmurs, it's my head. You try to reassure him, but the next morning brings bad omens. The purple silk is gone. Vanished. Guards swear no one entered the hall. The marble stands bow again, cold and accusing. Crispus stares at the empty statue, jaw clenched. You don't think, he begins, but doesn't finish. Maybe the gods took offense, you say lightly. He sighs. Or maybe thieves just have terrible taste. Still, he replaces the fabric, this time using crimson. Bold, imperial, safer. He sews all night, eyes hollow but burning. When he finally collapses into sleep, you could swear you hear the faint rustle of silk where none remains. The emperor's visit arrives too soon. The palace fills with incense and paranoia. When Caesar himself strides in, his presence is like sunlight through iron, beautiful and dangerous. He studies the statue silently, his expression unreadable. Crispus bows so low his knees creak. After an agonizing pause, the emperor smiles. You have captured divinity, he says. The folds breathe like thunderclouds. Rome will remember your name. Crispus exhales, relief flooding his face. Then my thread has served its empire. The emperor turns to leave, but then stops. Tell me, Tailor, he says, do you believe gods truly live in marble? Crispus hesitates. Only when people keep worshipping. The emperor chuckles. Then let them never stop. As the entourage departs, you both remain frozen, the vast hall echoing with fading footsteps. Crispus looks up at the statue one last time. Its marble gaze seems softer now, almost human. He thinks he owns the gods, he whispers. But he's just another statue waiting to happen. That night, back in the workshop, The cursed needle lies waiting on the table, glowing faintly in the dark. Crispus sits beside it, exhausted. I sewed for Jupiter, he murmurs, and now for Caesar. What's left? He leans back, eyes half closed. Maybe next time, I'll sew for time itself. See if that old thief can be tailored. You laugh, but it dies quickly. Outside, thunder rolls over the city, soft, deliberate, like applause from something very, very large. The days that follow feel almost unreal. Rome is still Rome, bustling and chaotic, yet your corner of it, the workshop, becomes a quiet storm of marble, cloth, and whispered ambition. Crispus refuses to rest properly, running his fingers over folds and seams like a sculptor with a new block of stone, muttering to himself about the emperor's statue, Jupiter, and that infernal cursed needle. He's insistent that the needle be used only on pieces with life in them. Nothing for show, he says. The gods notice. You begin to notice he's started murmuring to the statues as well, small comments about posture, drape, and elegance. Sometimes he pauses mid-stitch and smiles faintly, as if listening to a response. Historians still argue whether Roman artisans believed in divine interaction with their work, he says one evening, threading gold through a veil for a Venus statue. I've stopped worrying which side I fall on. The important thing is that I feel it. You nod, though you're not sure if it's encouragement or shared delusion. The neighborhood whispers that the tailor's workshop is enchanted. Children sneak by at dusk to peek through the doorway, catching glimpses of statues wrapped in shimmering silks. Some claim they've heard soft laughter from marble mouths. Crispus only shrugs. Better them than the magistrates, he says. One morning, a sculptor arrives carrying a fragment of a colossal statue, a hand almost as large as a small table. We need it draped, he says, for an upcoming dedication to Neptune. Kid you? He falters, clearly awed by the workshop, by Crispus's reputation. Crispus examines the hand, rolling it in his hands as if testing its patience. It's delicate work, he mutters. And delicate hands, they hold power. He selects a fine silk dyed the color of storm clouds, cutting it in precise lengths. As he sews, you notice a strange pattern. Every fold seems to mimic motion. Water spilling over rocks, wind catching sails, even the curling of a wave. The hand begins to look less like stone and more like a fragment of living Neptune, frozen mid-gesture. The sculptor, meanwhile, stares in disbelief. It's alive, he says, though he doesn't laugh. By evening, the statue hand rests on a velvet cushion. Crispus leans back, exhausted, murmuring, they should all feel like this, each fold a heartbeat, each stitch a breath. The cursed needle glimmers faintly nearby. You realize it hasn't been used in days, but its presence seems to charge the air like an unspoken promise. That night, while the city sleeps, Crispus begins a new project, a Venus he calls the Whispering One. He works with delicate gauze, light as mist, stitching for hours without pause. The fabric catches the candlelight, casting shifting shadows on the wall. You swear the statue leans slightly toward the window, as if listening to the city beyond. He pauses, wiping sweat from his brow. Sometimes, he says softly, I think I understand why the old Greeks painted their statues. Color, fabric, movement, they were trying to catch life in their hands. Outside, rain begins to patter on the roof. The sound mixes with the soft scrape of needle against fabric, and for a moment, the workshop feels like a heartbeat in the middle of Rome. You know, Crispus murmurs, eyes fixed on the Venus. The gods may live in marble, but I think they love silk more. It bends, it flows, it remembers, and you can't fold eternity into stone. You nod, leaning against a table, listening. There's a certain magic here, a quiet tension between reality and the illusion of life. Even the cursed needle, sitting silently, seems to hum with the potential of what might be. Hours pass. When you finally look around, Crispus has fallen asleep mid-stitch, gauze draped over his shoulder, the Venus's robe glowing faintly in candlelight. Outside, the city murmurs in storms and whispers, indifferent to the quiet miracles unfolding in a small Subura workshop. And yet, somewhere beneath the stones of Rome, in catacombs or forgotten temples, you feel certain the gods, or at least something like them, are watching. The next morning arrives with the scent of wet stone and bread baking in the forum. Crispus is already at work, eyes sharp, hands moving with the rhythm of someone who has stitched a lifetime in dreams. The cursed needle lies beside him, gleaming faintly, like it knows he'll need it soon. Today, a wealthy merchant has sent a commission, a statue of his deceased father, dressed in a toga that should convey both gravitas and approachability. The man insists the statue appear alive, yet dignified, a balance only Crispus could imagine. He wants the ghost of his father to impress neighbors, you mutter. Crispus smiles faintly, and perhaps remind the gods that the family still remembers their offerings. You help measure and drape, passing him threads of Tyrian purple and saffron, watching as his fingers twist them into folds that suggest movement, almost as if the marble breathes. Some say Romans never clothed their gods in fabric, he remarks. Historians still argue whether this was out of reverence or sheer laziness. Either way, we're correcting history. As he works, he hums softly, a tune you've heard only once before, the same melody when he dressed Jupiter. The notes seem to pulse through the workshop, and you swear the statue's marble lips almost curl in recognition. By midday, the workshop fills with curious onlookers. Apprentices peek through windows, citizens press their noses against doorways, and a few priests linger, muttering about omens. Crispus doesn't seem to notice. He's entirely absorbed in sculpting life through silk, lining gold thread along the edges of the toga, adjusting each fold to capture the subtle weight of gravity. The cursed needle quivers slightly as if it senses the ambition in the room. He picks it up, threading a single strand of gold silk, and mutters, "Just one stitch for the soul, then we're done." Hours pass in a blur of motion, light, and whispered debate. Finally, he steps back. The statue seems to exhale, shoulders easing, chin lifting with a dignity the marble alone could never convey. Even the priest, who had watched silently, murmurs, "Blessed are the hands that honor the dead." Crispus lets out a long breath. "It's done," he says softly. "Alive enough for living eyes, respectful enough for the beyond." You notice the statue seems to follow your movement slightly, shadows dancing over its face as if acknowledging your presence. A shiver runs down your spine. The city beyond the workshop is still the same: dust, noise, pigeons. But inside, the air feels heavy with quiet miracles. Late that evening, when the last candle guttered out, Crispus spoke in a whisper. "Sometimes I think the statues are teaching me. Each stitch, each fold, they tell a story older than Rome itself." You nod, exhausted, watching him close his eyes on a bench, fabric draped around his shoulders. Outside, the city's laughter and shouting fade to distant murmurs. Somewhere, a dog howls, but inside, the statues remain silent, patient, almost knowing. For the first time, you realize the workshop isn't merely a place of labor, it's a threshold. Between the living and the dead, the divine and the mortal, the marble and the fabric. And Crispus, exhausted yet determined, is the only one who can navigate it. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the faint rustle of silk against stone, wondering if the city above knows the quiet miracles being stitched into eternity below. The following morning, Crispus arrives with an unusual gleam in his eyes. He's been awake since before the first merchants opened their stalls, pacing the workshop, brushing dust from fabrics as if anticipating an invisible visitor. Today, he says, we push boundaries. You raise an eyebrow. Boundaries? Yes, he murmurs, spreading a bolt of deep azure silk across the table. Statues need motion. Not just folds, not just drape. They must tell stories, the kind the city will remember centuries from now. His ambition is infectious. You assist, cutting strips of fabric, passing him pins, and watching him work as if he's coaxing secrets from marble itself. The cursed needle rests beside him, gleaming faintly in lamplight. You wonder if it hums because it knows what's coming. A delivery arrives mid-morning. Several small statues from Ostia, unfinished, yet full of character. Children, dancers, a satyr with one missing hoof. Crispus examines each carefully, measuring, turning them in his hands. The challenge, he explains, is not just to clothe them. It's to give them presence. To breathe into stone. He begins with the satyr, draping him in moss-green velvet, stitching golden vines along the hem with the cursed needle. Each stitch seems deliberate, almost musical. Historians still argue whether Roman artisans imagined movement in marble or simply copied fabric, he muses. I think they tried, and failed. Hours pass. Sweat beads on his forehead, threads twist between his fingers, and the statues slowly come alive under his care. You start to notice patterns. The child's robe curls like water around legs, the dancer's skirt seems caught mid-spin, and the satyr appears to lean toward the sunlight, mischievous and real. Outside, whispers circulate in the streets. Crowds gather, drawn by tales of the statue's astonishing vitality. Children peek through windows, merchants pause mid-sale, and even the city guards tip their helmets, half in respect, half in disbelief. By sunset, the workshop is a gallery. Every statue, no matter the size or origin, radiates subtle life. Crispus steps back, wiping his hands. I've never seen so much personality in marble before, he admits. Or maybe they're finally thanking me. You notice the faintest movement, a flicker of silk, a lean of a shoulder, as if each statue is indeed aware, observing, responding. The cursed needle sits beside them, silent now, but heavy with potential. That night, the city feels unusually quiet, as if Rome itself pauses to admire what has been achieved in a tiny Subura workshop. Crispus lies awake, staring at the ceiling. We've touched the divine, he whispers. And the divine doesn't forget. Somewhere deep beneath, in catacombs or forgotten shrines, you imagine the old gods smiling, or at least nodding in acknowledgement. The next morning, a peculiar visitor arrives. An older woman, draped in layers of faded silk, her hands trembling as she holds a small, cracked statue. The moment she steps inside, the air seems heavier, charged with quiet reverence. I heard you dress the statues, she whispers, eyes darting nervously. Can you make him look at peace? Crispus studies the figure, a tiny man, carved roughly, his face twisted in some eternal grimace. Peace, he repeats, almost tasting the word. We can try. He threads the cursed needle, selecting a fabric soft as mist, dyed in muted earth tones. Historians still argue whether Romans sought to comfort the dead or to impress the living, he says, but comfort is easier to feel. He drapes the fabric carefully, folding each crease with meticulous attention, coaxing the marble into softness. You notice how his hands move differently than before, gentler, almost reverential. The woman watches in silence, clutching the edges of her robe. By mid-afternoon, the statue's rigid shoulders seem to relax. Even its marble face carries a gentleness that wasn't there before. The woman's lips tremble. He looks like he's breathing, she whispers. Crispus chuckles softly, though there's something unsteady in his voice. Marble doesn't breathe, he says. But fabric? Fabric remembers movement. Even stone likes the illusion. After she leaves, the workshop feels quieter than usual. The statues, arranged meticulously, seem to lean slightly toward the center, almost as if sharing their collective awareness of the act that just occurred. Later, Crispus works on another commission, a young boy's bronze figure, meant for a public fountain. The water has been drained for winter, leaving it inert and dull. He wraps the figure in azure silk, threading it with silver that glimmers faintly, capturing the reflection of candlelight. When he finishes, the folds catch light in a way that simulates flowing water, giving the statue a sense of motion it never had. The night grows long, and you notice the city outside has quieted to an almost unnatural stillness. Even the distant market calls seem muted. Crispus, exhausted, leans back, eyes scanning the workshop as if expecting judgment. Every stitch, he says, is a conversation with time itself. The thread binds not only fabric but memory, expectation, and something divine. A soft draft stares through the room. One of the smaller statues, a Venus wrapped in translucent gold, tilts her head. You blink. She's still. Yet the movement seems too deliberate to be accidental. Crispus notices, too, and smiles faintly. They're watching, he whispers. Not to judge, but to see if I remember what they once were. The cursed needle glints on the table, silent now, its presence almost protective, like an old friend observing the quiet miracles taking place. Outside, a lone dog barks in the distance, and the city exhales into night. For the first time in days, you sense that the boundary between stone and life, between the living and the remembered, has grown thinner. Crispus sleeps on a bench, surrounded by statues that seem to lean closer, curious, patient, almost sentient in the flickering lamplight. You sit quietly, wondering if Rome itself ever noticed the subtle pulse of divinity stitched into a small workshop, waiting in plain sight for those willing to see. A week later, the workshop feels crowded with the weight of stories. Statues fill every corner, draped in fabrics of every hue, each telling a silent narrative. Even the smallest figurines seem aware of their placement, shoulders angled, eyes turned toward light sources as if studying their audience. Crispus moves among them, hands fluttering over folds, murmuring instructions as though the statues themselves might answer. The cursed needle rests in its bronze cup, almost glowing in the lamplight. Today, Crispus says, we add the final touches, details that make the difference between lifeless and lived in. You assist, cutting threads, passing scissors, holding statues steady. Each fold, each pin, each stitch is deliberate, almost ritualistic. Historians still argue whether Roman tailors ever experimented this boldly with statues, he says. I suspect they didn't dare. Fear keeps hands cautious. By mid-afternoon, a delegation arrives, 3 wealthy patrons, 2 priests, and a visiting sculptor from Athens. They move carefully, speaking in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb the fragile illusion of life Crispus has cultivated. Your work, it is extraordinary, one patron murmurs, eyes widening at the Venus wrapped in gold-threaded gauze. It breathes. Crispus smiles faintly. Not the marble, he corrects gently. The fabric remembers. The marble only holds the gesture. The sculptor from Athens nods slowly, running his fingers over a draped toga. I've studied Greek statues all my life, he says. But I've never seen this. It's like watching the soul move through thread. Even the priests exchange glances, muttering small prayers under their breath. Maybe the gods approve, Crispus whispers. Or maybe they're curious. Either way, we are their messengers tonight. As the sun begins to set, Crispus directs the arrangement of the statues. He groups them in tableaus: a mother and child, a god and his disciple, a soldier returning from campaign, a dancer caught mid-leap. Each figure is bathed in warm light, the folds of fabric catching shadows and highlights, giving the sense of perpetual motion. You notice something strange: the statues seem to respond to one another. The dancer's skirt flutters toward the mother and child, the god's robe tilts toward the soldier, almost as if acknowledging one another's presence. Even the small Venus glimmers faintly, as though aware of her audience. Crispus steps back, chest heaving with exhaustion and satisfaction. "This," he says softly, "is what I wanted. Not perfection, not stillness. Motion, memory, attention. Life woven through marble and silk." Outside, Rome carries on, indifferent, unaware of the quiet miracles in a small Subura workshop. But inside, the statues seem almost conscious, their presence a testament to human devotion, craft, and audacity. The cursed needle glints one last time under lamplight. Crispus gazes at it, then lays it down carefully. "You've done your part," he murmurs. "Now they move themselves." You sit quietly, listening to the subtle rustle of silk and the imagined sigh of marble, realizing that for a brief moment, the line between the living and the remembered has blurred completely. The next morning, the workshop feels strangely serene. The air is warmer, scented faintly with beeswax and linen. Crispus moves among the statues, adjusting folds, smoothing edges, whispering to them as if offering parting advice. He no longer works with the fevered urgency that consumed him days ago. Instead, there's calm, a quiet reverence that fills the room like sunlight pooling over stone floors. You notice how each statue seems perfectly placed now, forming a subtle choreography. The mother's hand hovers over her child, the soldier's gaze meets the god's, the dancer's skirt drifts mid-leap. Crispus calls it harmony, though you realize it is more than that. It is memory, story, life held in thread and marble. A final commission arrives, a wealthy matron, bringing a marble bust of her late husband. He never smiled, she murmurs, voice trembling. "Could you give him a gentleness?" Crispus studies the bust. "Gentleness," he repeats, his voice soft. He selects pale gray linen, gold threaded around the collar, folds it carefully over the shoulders. Each stitch is deliberate, measured, as though coaxing the marble to release a long-forgotten expression. The bust seems to soften. His jaw unclenches. You think you can see a faint relief, a hint of warmth that wasn't there before. Historians still argue whether Romans believed they could alter the spirit of the dead through art, Crispus murmurs. "I say the act matters more than the belief." The matron cries quietly, pressing a coin into his hand before leaving. Outside, the city hums as always, oblivious to the miracle of a marble smile restored. As dusk falls, Crispus stands in the center of the workshop, surrounded by his creations. The cursed needle rests in its bronze cup, silent now, a tool that has stitched not just fabric but memory, reverence, and perhaps a little magic. He exhales slowly, the weight of days pressing down, and yet there's a faint smile on his lips. You watch him, thinking about the journey, from Jupiter twitching in a tiny temple, to Caesar's colossal presence, to the soft gestures for the forgotten and the mourned. The city outside rumbles and shifts, indifferent, yet inside, there is stillness, awe, and something enduring. Crispus speaks at last, almost a whisper. "They'll remember us differently," he says, gesturing at the statues. "Not because we made them, but because we gave them care, attention, life." You sit beside him in quiet understanding. The workshop is a heartbeat in the city, a place where stone breathes, fabric flows, and time seems to pause just long enough for a human hand to touch eternity. Evening deepens, lamplight flickers, and the statues stand motionless, yet alive, witnesses to the smallest acts of devotion, daring, and craft. The cursed needle gleams faintly one last time, as if nodding in approval. The city hums beyond the walls, unaware of the quiet miracles sewn into every fold, every stitch, every curve of marble and fabric. And for a moment, you believe that the gods themselves pause to admire Crispus's work. The workshop slowly quiets, the candles burning lower as night stretches across the city. Outside, the streets grow dim, and the hum of distant voices fades into a gentle, steady rhythm. Crispus leans back on a bench, exhausted but serene, gazing at the statues that surround him like silent companions. Their forms are still, yet somehow the light, the folds of their robes, and the subtle arcs of gold thread suggest a quiet pulse, as if they remember the hands that tended them and the lives they once reflected. You breathe in the scent of beeswax and worn linen, letting the softness of the moment sink in. Even in the vastness of Rome, with its shouting markets and relentless ambition, this small corner feels timeless. Here, marble and silk, memory and care, converge into something enduring. You realize the city can roar and crumble, yet what has been stitched with attention and love will linger far longer. The night draws closer, slow and deliberate, wrapping the workshop in a soft, protective cloak. Outside, a few stray sounds of the city, footsteps, a dog's bark, the faint crash of a distant cart, reach you like whispers from another world. But here, in the warmth of lamplight and quiet breath, the statues stand as gentle witnesses, as though the universe itself has paused to honor them. You close your eyes and feel the rhythm of the city slow, the gentle sway of cloth and marble merging into a heartbeat you can almost hear. Crispus's soft snores and the faint rustle of silk against stone lull the space into stillness, until all that remains is calm. The stories sewn into fabric, stitched into marble, linger in the quiet, safe and eternal. Rest comes easily here,